Okay, well, I'm super excited that everybody's here. And if you do not know who I am, I feel like I'm gonna trip on something, so I'm gonna move out over here so I can kind of point to this. My name is Peggy Wright. I'm the managing broker of the office, and I think I know most of everybody in here. There's a couple of faces that I don't. So first of all, before we get started, is it hot in here? Is it just me?
It's hot.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. Because
75. They always keep it hot in here, yeah.
yeah, it was on heat, so I usually am freezing everybody out, so I'm gonna turn that down, and if you start to shake, or your lips turn blue, I'll move it back up. So, it's the end of the year, December the 16th, and you will be getting CE credit for that, for this class, so I'm gonna need Casey to send around a page. Got it? Okay, good. So next to your names though, please put your license number. So it takes me a really long time to look up everybody's license number if it's not already on there. So if we could start that back around and just make sure that your license number is on there. So who in here is provisional licensee? Provisional, okay. So it's very super important that you're in this class because you need to know how to fill out the purchase contracts. Unfortunately for you, you will not be getting CE credit for this. So your CE credit will come when you take your post licensing class, and that you'll get to see this whole presentation again. Now the thing about purchase contracts, one, if you ever feel like you have it memorized, you don't. So, and I say that because they change it every single year. So sometimes it's little bitty changes and sometimes it's great big changes, and my job is to make sure that you know what they are. So we're going to be looking at the purchase contract for the year 2020. I know we're coming in 2021. I think they were a little off last year because of COVID and the contracts committee was not meeting. So you got a little bit of a reprieve there. But we're going to be looking at the residential contract today. Now, there are a couple different contracts if you're new in real estate. So there's one that you're going to use for purchasing an existing house, which is the contract that we're going to be using today. So 90% of all of our transactions are done using this contract because you're going to be working with homes that somebody has lived in previously. There is a new build contract, which differs just a little bit. The nice thing about it is if you get this contract down, new build contracts are not much different. The only thing that's really different about a new build contract is the inspection period and the fact that you have an inspection period, but you're not asking for repairs. You give the ability to cancel based on repairs. You have to give the builder an opportunity to correct the problem. So they're very, very similar. There is also a land only contract. If you're purchasing a piece of property that does not have a structure that someone's going to live in, then you can use the land only contract. So, and then all of the contracts are pretty similar. The only difference in the land only contract is that you're not doing home inspections because there's no home. Did that kick on?
No.
I don't think so. We're gonna go down. Because I feel like it's still hot now. Not just me. Okay, yeah, it's me. I probably, it's like, you get to this certain age. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now you have your printed copy in front of you. So there are going to be some things if you want to circle, you want to highlight. I'm going to say, make sure that you're paying attention to this. So the first thing is that you're going to have a page on here that looks like this. Now this at the top, if you'll notice, it says acknowledgement and confirmation of disclosures. But if you look down here in the bottom right-hand corner, it says page 1 of 1. Now here's the most interesting thing about this. Now this is the 2020 version of this. If you pull this from the Real Estate Commission's website directly with just the one and only page, this table's like in my way. So this date that you're going to see over here is going to say 2014. It's okay. They say the exact same thing. So with this form, there's a couple different things that it does. Now, this form, believe it or not, I know our office, if you're in our office, requires this form as part of your transaction. And the reason why is it's a summary page. The Real Estate Commission really only looks for this page when you're representing both sides in the transaction. You could put it on another document. They allow you to create your own other documents, but we don't allow our agents to create their own documents because we like everything to be the same. So it keeps us all out of the real estate jail. And there is actually one. No, I'm just kidding. There's not. If you go below the Real Estate Commission, it's the Workman's Comp Court, which is similar to jail. So, okay, so let's come up here to where you see the yellow arrow, and it is pointing to a word. What is the word?
Prior.
Prior. So when we read this sentence, prior to you entering into a contract, you were going to do all of these things. Now, the reason that I call this a summary sheet is because everything that you need to know before you ever start writing a contract is located here. It's like a little cheat sheet that you can go and check mark things for. So the very first thing we want to look at after we write the property address in, when you are writing an offer for a client, obviously the house that they're wanting to make the offer on is going to go on the blank with the address, but it says that the buyer acknowledges and confirms. Now, in the real estate world, when it says buyer acknowledges and confirms, what does that mean? They saw it, they signed it. If they saw it and they didn't sign it, did they see it? No. Is that even a word? I don't know. So we'll see. But if you can't say, it's not enough to say, I sent it to them, or I looked at it, or I know that they reviewed it. I have it in my email that I sent it to them. That's not enough. They have to sign these things. So what are they seeing and signing in this instance? So the first of all, you are telling them that you are providing brokerage services to them. And brokerage services are really super important. It's a state law that you require, that you disclose to them what your duties and responsibilities are. So when we talk about how do we explain our duties and responsibilities to the client, they want you to use this form. Now that should be in your packet, but if it is not, there's two versions of this floating around out there because it's the government. We have one that looks really, really pretty, and it has the state of Oklahoma seal on it, and it says broker duties and responsibilities, and it's so pretty that there's nowhere for them to sign. Now, what does it say that they have to do? They have to acknowledge and confirm. So that's one that you can show it to them and just go, and here's the paper we wasted. But this is the form that we're going to require you to put into your file. Now, if you happen to have a pretty form and you want to have them initial or write on it somewhere that's perfect, that's okay too. It just doesn't have this little sign spot right here. So now up at the top, you're going to just check mark, how are you working with them? I'm just writing the offer, or I have a buyer brokerage agreement in existence already. And we are not going to probably be ever check marking that we're in a listing agreement, because our listing agreement already has all of this information incorporated in the document. So primarily, you're only going to be using this with buyers. Here's the thing, you're going to have this 100% of the time. There will not be a buyer contract that you write that will ever be missing this document. So does anybody know how much this document could potentially cost you if you don't have it in the audit your file?
$5,000.
Not 5,000.
500.
So it's 2,000. This is a $2,000 piece of paper. So y'all are close. So they can fine you at a minimum 100. Never seen that happen. So, but the maximum fine that they can give you for missing this document in your file, $2,000. So that's a pretty big, expensive piece of paper not to have. So you want to make sure that you get it. Now, here's the other thing that I want to say about this. You don't have to sign this at the time of your writing the offer period. So you meet someone, you have a buyer consultation with them, and you want to have a buyer brokerage agreement signed, have the buyer brokerage agreement and this signed at the same time, keep it in your file and just keep it. So, and then you always have it. So you don't need to have a new one of these. How many of you wrote 10, 15 offers for one client during 2020? Oh my gosh, I felt like I got to be a professional, and I think I pretty much know how to do it. And now I'm like real good at it. It's real, I don't even think that's a word. I can't even today. But anyway, if you fill this out one time, you don't need it again. Did you have a question?
I had a question. So, the buyer brokerage agreement and the sales agreement is only if you're writing the contract if you're not the buyer broker with that person.
Correct.
Now, what is your, and tell me if I'm off track, but with the buyer broker, it has a list of things that your services you're providing to the buyer. What's different between the two of them? Like if you're just writing the contract versus you're in a buyer broker.
Buyer brokerage agreement versus just your duties and responsibilities. In a duties and responsibilities, you're to exercise honesty and reasonable skill and care. So, which means that you're being honest, you're disclosing the information that you know about it, but really that's about it. If I know about it, I'm gonna tell you if it's a defect or something like that. When you're in a buyer brokerage agreement, you owe them your expert opinion.
Right.
Yeah, so, everything that you have as far as your experience, running the comps, different things like that for them, which is always advisable.
Right.
So, but yeah, you owe them a little bit higher service. Buyer brokerage agreements also allow you to order inspections on behalf of your buyer. So without that expense coming back to you. So it's a little bit different.
But the buyer broker agreement, because I'm looking at mine, that I just have mine signed, it's like the same thing.
It has two. Okay, and we don't have that in this class, but there are two buyer brokerage agreements floating around out there. There's one that's produced by the Real Estate Commission. The Real Estate Commission's buyer brokerage agreement is only 2 pages long. So 2 pages long plus this page gives you 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. That's math class today. So the second buyer brokerage agreement was created by Oakmar. So Oakmar is the MLS, oversees the MLS. So, and their buyer brokerage agreement is 3 pages long because they took this document and incorporated it into their buyer brokerage. They both say the exact same thing. You end up with the same amount of paper when you're done. 3 pages, 3 pages.
Okay, so you don't have a preference.
No. So the reason the Real Estate Commission separates those 2 documents out, 2 pages for the buyer brokerage agreement, 1 page for duties and responsibilities, is because buyer brokerage agreements are not required by the state. So if you want to operate without a safety net and you're like, I don't really want to have buyer brokerage agreements signed, I don't care whether I showed them all weekend and they wrote an offer with somebody else. Who says that? So then you can absolutely work without a buyer brokerage agreement. It's up to you. Okay, they don't enforce that. Okay, yes.
Maybe I shouldn't be saying it out loud, but
Probably not.
what does our compliance ask for? Because
This document only. Okay. If
not what happened with me.
did he ask for your buyer brokerage agreement?
That's all I ever turn in. I don't do this.
But.
Well, you're probably using the one with 3
are you
pages.
using the 3-page one?
I don't think so. I'll check, but okay.
Okay.
The 3-page one?
3-page one.
Because I only
I don't
turn
think so.
in the buyer brokerage agreement, but it has this.
Yeah, if it has the disclosures within, we can look at yours and see what's
All
going
right.
on.
I
No,
don't wanna
no,
go
no,
We'll just try to add up those $2,000.
Real
What is Aaron gonna owe by the end of this class? I said, what are you gonna owe by the end of this class?
Yeah.
Wow.
Take $2 grand.
Maybe I should not have come to this class.
Best birthday ever.
We'll call it the gift of giving. So, okay, second thing that we're gonna look at on here. So now we've looked at broker duties and responsibilities. Now we're going to be looking at this box that's at the top. So where the yellow arrow is pointing, you're gonna notice that there's an exact replica of that at the bottom. This means that this is applicable for in-house transactions only. Now, the Real Estate Commission will be looking for this document if you represent both sides in the transaction. So what does representing both sides in the transaction mean? That could be you personally are the listing agent, you personally represent the buyer. Or it could mean you are the listing agent and someone within your same brokerage represents the buyer. So when you're asking yourself, should I check this box or should I not check this box? I want you to be thinking, who benefits financially if these 2 real estate agents close this transaction? For me, it would be Keller Williams Mullenix. If I were doing a transaction with a Keller Williams Edmond agent, is the same broker going to benefit?
No.
No, because they have 2 separate brokers, no check mark needed. So don't get confused when we talk about franchises because each franchise is independently owned and operated. So if they work in your office, check mark the box. If they do not work in your office, you do not need to check mark the box unless it's you personally representing both sides or your team. Okay, some of you have teams.
So in our office's case, if I sold one of Skylar's listings, or crazy thing, if I sold someone a agent down in Ardmore.
You do need to check mark the box because ultimately I'm the broker of all of those. So they are like kind of like sub brokers. They're the brokers, but it all rolls like that.
So you're over here, Mullenix, Ardmore, and
As the main broker, they our Pauls Valley office and our Ardmore office are branch offices. So, and they do have their own brokers in place, but ultimately it's like it's kind of like a branch of a bank. You have a main bank and then you have the branch offices, all responsible to the main. So go ahead and check it, you know, it's always better to err on the side of caution than not. So I always recommend that you do. Okay, so check marking, let's go to the next section. So the next thing that you're going to be check marking, whether, you know, as you go through your little checklist, buyer is going to acknowledge receipt of the property disclosures or disclaimer statements. Who creates these disclosures or disclaimer statements?
The seller.
The seller. Where can I find them?
All over the place.
Okay.
Or
All over the
on-
place, trash can.
Document.
So if I'm going to write an offer for a client, they should be uploaded in the MLS, and they're the paper icon that's next to the picture of the property on the MLS sheet. So if you will click, it's like a 3-page little icon, click on that and you'll be able to download the property disclosures that have been provided by the seller. You must show those to your buyers prior to them entering into a contract. If they enter into a contract and then look at the property disclosures and then say, oh, well, I didn't know this house has had termites before, I don't want to buy a house with termites, is it too late? Yeah, they're already in contract. So show it to them before they go in contract, under contract. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 different types of disclosures. So on the first box, if you are filling out the 3-page disclosure, it works, it doesn't work, I don't know if it's working, it doesn't come with the property. Then you're going to check mark box number 1, that's the disclosure. If you are giving them the piece of paper that's 1 page that says, I don't know anything about this property and I've never lived in it, that's the disclaimer, so check mark the 2nd box. Now, the 3rd box is for exempt properties. The property is exempt from disclosures. Now, technically, we would say that if we're exempt from filling out disclosures, we don't even need this form. But for the buyer, the reason we have our buyer sign this is because if buyers say, well, it's state law, I'm supposed to get disclosures. How come I get disclosures? You can say, remember, you're exempt, and here is the reason why. So there's 9 different reasons that that a potential seller could be exempt from filling out disclosures. The most popular reasons.
How old is there?
Yeah, well, no, that's not necessarily true. They'd use a disclaimer for that. They didn't have any knowledge. Mostly it's foreclosures, or you're purchasing a property that's branded, that's never been lived in. Okay, so occasionally you'll see that when it's a trustee that's in charge of taking care of an estate of some kind, but those are the 2 most popular reasons. Okay, so buyer, you didn't get a disclosure because this property is exempt, and here's the reason why. Now, if there is no residence, remember this state law, and it is an actual state law that sellers fill out property disclosures. If there is no residence on it, then this wouldn't apply, because that state law only applies to places that people are going to live. So what kind of buildings are you not going to live in? Commercial properties. So commercial properties, or if you're just buying land, okay, you're not getting disclosures because you're just buying land and there's nothing to disclose. We don't have land disclosures in Oklahoma. So there are some MLSs, if you go outside of the metro, they've created their own. It will say, are there buried, tanks? Are there pipelines? There are different things that people might want to know. Have you had a soil test? Have you had a water test? But that's not required by the state. So if they're having you complete a disclosure at any time, it's because they added it in addition to what the state requires. It's not something that the real estate commission is going to audit and look for. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is right below the property disclosures, lead-based paint. Now, every property is not going to have a lead-based paint. What's the year we're looking for? 1978. If the property was built before 1978, you need to have your seller should have filled out a lead-based paint. This is not a state of Oklahoma disclosure, okay? This is a federal disclosure. The Environmental Protection Agency fills this out. They require it. It can be a $10,000 fine for not having it. Remember, this leaves the state of Oklahoma and goes straight to federal. So make sure that your buyers are reviewing that and signing if they have it. Second thing that if you look at that first checkbox, not only are you showing it to them, you're giving them a copy of the lead-based paint pamphlet. Now you're going to be able to find that on DocuSign, you can also get that off of the Real Estate Commission website. I suggest that you do not print it for your clients, because in true government form, they use full color ink on all 17 pages, and you will be replacing your ink in your printer if you're printing this all the time. So email it over to them. That is considered disclosure. Now, if the property was built after 1978, then you're going to check mark box number 2. And then if this is not a residential dwelling, they're not required to have a lead-based paint form, so you would check mark the appropriate box. So, but in the end, some box needs to be check marked here, okay, whatever's applicable. Okay, the next thing your buyer is going to be acknowledging is right above the signature line. Buyer acknowledges and confirms the above, and they acknowledge that they have received an estimate of cost. Now, when did all of these things happen?
Prior.
Before they enter into a contract. So what I hear real estate agents do all the time is, oh, I'll just get a lender's estimate once we go under contract. Because a lender can't give you an estimate for a specific property until it's under contract. Is that too late?
Yes.
Yeah. So if they audit your file and they go, when did you get this? You know, you could be in trouble. So make sure they don't care if you use the 2-page, net sheet, or if you have some kind of app on if you're using one of the title company apps, you can flip over the back of a napkin at a restaurant, as long as you tell them what their expenses are gonna be and have them sign it, okay? As long as they're aware, because most people are super aware that they need a down payment. They're less aware that they need title insurance. They're less aware of all of the other expenses that go along. What do you mean I've got to have a lender's policy? What do you mean? I've got to do a survey. They have no idea. So your buyer has now, 1, duties and responsibilities. 2, you've shown them let's back that up. So 2, you've given them the property disclosures. 3, you've given them the lead-based paint disclosure if it has one. And then 4, you've given them an estimate of cost. So we've got 4 documents that we've talked to our buyers about. We haven't even started writing the offer yet. That's a lot. Okay, any questions so far?
If your date on your estimated cost to buyer is actually dated after the offer is signed, how much of a fine is that?
$2,000.
Okay.
Yeah, everything's $2,000 unless you've really messed it up a lot in the transaction, and then the max you can pay is 5. So like I said, the real estate commission's not going to be, there's only 3 of them, guys. Well, there's 7 people on the panel, but there's only 3 investigators. They're not coming going, I think somebody in Norman didn't have a net sheet signed. That's not their role, okay? They have to have a reason to audit your file. Most of the time, if they're auditing your file, it's because somebody made a complaint. Once the complaint has been made, that's when they say, I need to see the whole thing. And then when they start digging through your file and they're like, where's this, where's this, where's this? That's where the findings come from. So just make sure that you have a system of check marking these things off every single time, and that every single file has it. You don't have any problems. It's all easy, huh?
Does the file also need to have the protect your family from letting your home in the DocuSign file? Like showing that we sent it, like there's no proof that you
Like
sent
lead-based
it.
paint?
Yeah.
Initial.
It's a good idea to have that in there, but you need to have some, when it's audited, your lead-based paint thing comes down to the EPA. So if it ever came down to there was a problem and they came back to audit your file because of that reason, they're gonna wanna know that you provided that pamphlet to them. So whether you email it over,
Okay.
just have some type of.
I was just looking for
transaction.
that the other day on the ORAC page under the forms.
It's underneath, it's at the very, very bottom,
I
underneath
searched
the
for
additional.
lead-based. Okay, so it's the last one. I looked
Yeah.
for it, I couldn't find
And
it.
in their little categories, go to the last one and it pulls up all their miscellaneous type stuff.
Their signature on this document confirming that they received it does not tell them that they received it.
It should,
Okay.
but they, have buyers are, I don't remember seeing that. Always CYA, always covering your rear end. Okay, now, bottom of this document, the only thing that I want to point out on here is that if you're working with both sides, again, you're gonna check mark that box here. And you'll notice that this document says that the seller has received an estimate of cost that goes with this transaction. So I'm gonna flip you over to the listing side of things, and you're receiving an offer. Once you have received an offer, you need to do an estimate of cost on the offer that you have received. So you'll essentially have done one when you went on a listing appointment, and then you'll do another cost sheet for the seller once they have received an offer on that property. And I know that it's not convenient, and I know it's not fun to do multiple net sheets when you're doing multiple offers, but it is required by the state, okay? Now, if you're working with a for sale by owner, the only time that you need to be providing a cost sheet is when you represent them, okay? If we go back to this document right here, it says the only time you have to produce an estimate of cost is when you personally represent that person. If you're working with a for sale by owner and they're paying your commission, do you represent them? You do not represent them. Paying your commission does not in any way, shape, or form mean that you represent them in any way. So therefore, if you're working with a for sale by owner, you're not required to give them an estimate of cost. They didn't hire representation, and the bottom of this just simply would not be signed. Okay, let's go to the next page. So this is your first page. Now you're going to notice at the bottom it says page 1 of 6. So a couple different things on here. If you're using a site like Transaction Desk or DocuSign, hopefully it's filling in the address at the top of every page because it will be there. But let's take a look at this side of things. So with your contract documents, this says the contract is defined as this document, which means pages 1 through 6, and the following attachments. So if you check mark something here on the left or the right hand side, you're going to be attaching those documents to these 6 pages. So it can be lots of pages long. So you're going to choose, if your buyer is financing, choose the appropriate financing that goes along with that. And then over on the right hand side, you see single family document, single family homeowners association, condo, there's a supplement, contingency forms, which we'll talk about at the end of this class, and then you see a blank. Now this blank can be used for if you're doing a 1031 tax exchange. People think that 1031 tax exchanges are cash. Are they cash? They're essentially not cash because you have an asset manager that has to sign off on this. Cash means I can go to the bank and I can get it and I can do this myself. So 1031 exchanges, there's a middleman, so you need to make sure that the seller understands that. If you are writing an escalation clause, which has been super popular in the last year and a half, you want to make that escalation clause part of this contract, you need to write escalation clause on here so that it is included. Okay. Any questions on that part?
Just in case somebody doesn't know what a 1031 is, because I didn't when I was brand new.
Okay, thank you. 1031 tax exchange is primarily used by investors to take the profits that they've received from a property that they are selling and reinvest them into another property without paying capital gains on it. So we're kind of kicking the can down the road on paying taxes. So they're just, and they have a limited amount of time that needs to happen. So they have to identify the property and get it closed within a short period of time. So that's a whole nother class. Okay. So again, the single family homeowners association, if your buyer wants to review those covenants, codes, and restrictions, or the condo covenants, codes, and restrictions, they absolutely have the ability to do that. But if you check mark it, make sure that you're getting what you're asking for. All right, on the sellers, take a look at the tax records. Your seller's name here needs to be what's on the tax records. If you're not sure if that's still the person that owns it, you can always follow up that name with owner of record. It is not ideal to leave this blank, and I see that all the time. So who is this contract supposed to be between? So person's name or owner of record. Now, before you put your buyers' names on here, ask your buyers what their legal names are, because you've been calling them that name does not mean that that's what they're going to need to take title in. So, and they may need you to add, like a junior or a senior or a third or something to their name, or a middle initial of some kind. So just ask before you write that in. Now, the entire paragraph that you see below that, now I should have said that when I first started, we're not reading this contract word for word. So you can do that. And I do encourage you to go back and read it word for word so you're familiar with it. But today we're going to be hitting all the major highlights that you need to know about. So when I say we're going to summarize this, that's what we're going to do. On this first paragraph, this entire paragraph just says that 1, we're allowed to use electronic signatures in Oklahoma. And that if we had two separate documents, as long as they're exactly alike, then two people can sign on two different documents and put them together. But the most important paragraph in here, which you want to underline, circle, put stars beside, is this sentence right here that I just highlighted in red. All prior written negotiations, representations, and agreements are superseded by this contract. We like to look at our MLS and go, oh, well, it said it in the MLS, so it must be true. Okay, it's kind of like the internet. So I saw it on the internet, must be true. So, and on the MLS sheet, it may say that the seller is leaving the refrigerator, the seller is leaving whatever. So if you don't write that in your contract, is that, or is the seller going to be contractually bound to make that happen? No. So unless you're in the market to buy refrigerators and washers and dryers as closing gifts for your clients, make sure that you're putting them in or doing bills of sale, because it will not transfer. They'll sell them on Craigslist and it'll be done, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And exclusions are the same animal.
Yep.
You end up with jumps.
Yes, yes. So somebody's gonna leave you some presents.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Didn't it used to say somewhere right around here that this was a cash transaction unless you mark one of these?
Well, it does, but it's not in this paragraph.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we don't write cash on here and check it, like I used to do that.
Yep. No, but now, and so let's just talk about where that's at.
Okay.
Go down to paragraph 2.
Okay.
Look right after the bold print,
There it
purchase
is.
price, and it
Yep.
says this is a cash transaction.
Okay.
Unless noted by finance page or supplement. If I were to write cash up here on this blank, so right there, what would have to be attached to this contract?
Proof of financing.
Proof of financing, the cash. If you tell me, because it says it's this contract is defined as this document with all the following attachments, and you said cash, so where is it?
You're sending it over.
Yeah,
a bunch
send
of
me all
cash.
your cash. I'll be sure to show up at closing.
Right.
Have a Polaroid.
Yeah. So, okay, so now make sure that you're putting things in contracts. Now, it's super important if you're on the, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna flip you back over to the listing side sometimes too. If you're on the listing side of things and you have reserved the mineral rights in the listing contract, you even set it on the MLS. Mineral rights reserved, and it doesn't show up in this contract or the mineral rights reserved. No, so make sure that you are guaranteeing that your mineral rights are reserved if they need to be, because that can get you in a mess, in a hot mess pretty quick. All right, insert the county that the property is located here, and then we move down to paragraph 1, and you need a legal description. You can get the legal description from the tax records. If the legal description happens to be too long for you to type here, which can happen if you're selling rural property, or if it's got a really long legal description, or if you're putting 2 or 3 properties together. If that happens, just write C, attach supplement, go back up to the top and check mark the word supplement, and that's where you're gonna put the legal description, okay? Property's physical address is going to go here. And then if you read down below the physical address, together with all the features and improvements, all the appurtenances subject to all the zoning restrictions, plat and deed restrictions, utility easements, including all the mineral rights. And as you read that, it'll say, unless those mineral rights were previously excluded. I can't sell you what I don't own, but if I do own them, they will transfer to you unless that is specifically reserved. Any questions on paragraph 1? Okay, let's go to paragraph 2. Now, this is where we have the purchase price, earnest money, and source of funds. And this is going to be a cash transaction unless you tell me otherwise. And you're going to have a purchase price in which you and the seller have agreed. So we're going to pretend in this one that it's $150,000. That's what we agreed to put on there. Before you allow a buyer to decide on a purchase price, please do a market analysis for them to find out what the fair market value is. Could they offer more than fair market value?
Sure.
Sure. So could they offer way less?
Sure.
You're like, yes. So, okay, they can do either one, but make sure that you are at least telling them. You don't want to get into a situation where they come back later and say, well, I way overpaid for this house, and who let me do it? My real estate agent, okay? So you need to have proof that you showed them what the market analysis looks like. Okay, if the offer is accepted, reading on from where you put the purchase price in. So within 3 days of the execution of the contract, the buyer is going to deliver some earnest money. Now, first of all, what does execution of the contract mean? Okay, whose signatures? Sellers and buyers. When you only have a buyer signature, you have an offer. That is not a contract. A fully executed contract takes both signatures. When you have that, your timer starts. You've got 3 days to deliver earnest money. Now, it's a good idea to make your earnest money 1% of whatever the transaction is, but that's just a rule of thumb. It doesn't have to be. It can be whatever the buyer and the seller agree to. It could be 0 if you wanted it to be, as long as buyer and seller agree that there is going to be no earnest money held. So we typically only do this as a show of good faith. So, okay, where are you putting this earnest money? It needs to go into an account, and that account of where you're going to be delivering it needs to be listed here. So if I write Keller Williams Mullenix on this line, because I intended to put the earnest money here, but they deposit the money at the title company, is that okay?
No.
No, you need to do an addendum to change that right there. So make sure, because the real estate commission is gonna come in and go, where's the earnest money? And you're gonna go, title company? And they're like, well, it should be here. So you can get yourself in trouble on that.
I have a quick question. You said that we needed proof that we showed the buyer the fair market value.
I said it's a good idea.
Oh, it's a good idea.
It's a good practice.
Okay,
It's not a requirement, it's just a good idea.
Okay.
Remember, in real estate, you're always covering your rear end,
right, okay.
okay?
Peggy, could you just adjust this on the contract with initials? If they put it in the wrong place without doing an addendum, could you scratch it out, add something and send it out for initials?
Yeah, you can always mark through and add something else. Makes it a little messy, hard to read, but could you do it? Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so earnest money is gonna be held here. Now that 3-day count, when does that count, or when does that counter, what days are not included on that? Saturdays, Sundays, or legal holidays. So let's say Friday was day 1, Saturday and Sunday would not be day 2 and 3. It would begin on Monday. So Friday, Monday, Tuesday, get it delivered. Now here's the biggest misconception in real estate. I didn't deliver earnest money, therefore this isn't a real contract. True or false?
False.
False. So earnest money does not make a contract. It just gives the seller a reason to sue you for not delivering it. Okay, so not delivering earnest money within that 3 days puts the buyer in breach of the contract that they've signed. So make sure that you understand that your buyer understands this is part of the contract. They can sue you for not delivering it if they
But
chose
they
to.
can't just back out of the contract because so they're still bound to it. They're just could sue you for not.
So, yep. Okay, let's move down to paragraph 3. Let's talk about closing, funding, and possession. So closing is going to happen when you have executed all of the documents, delivered the deed, and have a receipt of funds by the seller. Now that is going to happen on or before whatever date you write in here. Now I have on here that typically your closing can be 30 or 45 days later, but I want to put some caveats with that. If you're going to be using VA financing, USDA financing, Native American financing, I would err on the side of caution and do 45 to 60 days on closing. It is taking so long to get the appraisers to get out there to get the appraisals done. So just be careful. USDA has a double underwriting process, which means the bank goes through underwriting and then they send it to USDA and they do underwriting. So it takes a little bit longer and then the VA is just slow. So
Yeah, it's manual, and the hard one before is too, so they actually have to have a human sign off on it before they give you the CDC.
yep, it is super, it takes a little while. And for whatever reason now it seems to be taking a little bit longer. So remember, you can always close early, you just can't close late. So if everybody agrees, let's say I were to put February the 1st on here and everybody has everything ready to go by January the 15th. If buyer and the seller are in agreement that they want to close early, you can close early and you don't need any other paperwork. If we go past February the 1st, now we need extensions. So we need an addendum to extend the close date. Any questions on that part? All right. You can't really see it up here and I apologize, but if you look down here on the very last line, it says that the funds, the last sentence, the funds required from buyer and seller at closing are going to be cash, cashier's check, wire transfer, or as determined by the provider of the settlement services. We put cash on here because it's the legal tender of the United States. You cannot show up with a bag of cash at closing due to the Patriot Act. So unfortunately, they will not accept cash because they have to be able to trace it. All right, let's go to paragraph 2 or page 2. Again, put your property address at the top. And now on paragraph 4, I usually do take a pause on this for just a moment and have them review this, the items that the seller is going to be leaving at no cost to the buyer. So they need to really read over that. You know, ideally, when you're showing property and they're like, oh, this is the one, this is it, I'm sure. Okay, now that you're in love with it, let's walk back through and see, is there anything that you want the seller to leave? Or is there anything that you want to guarantee that the seller needs to take, like the junk that's been left over in the garage? So as you're going through this list, be thinking about that, but as you're showing property, try and be mindful of that also. Now, anything that you want the seller to take. So I do want to go back up here to the top. This is the one that I see the most complaints about, or I haven't in a while, but there for a while, they had a pretty good run. Swimming pool, spa equipment, accessories. This is not the pool loungers, okay? They're not, well, they were supposed to leave all the accessories. Accessories are like the pool cleaning stuff, spa cleaning stuff, not the things you're gonna get some sun with. Okay, anything that you want to make sure that these sellers leave with the home, you need to write it on paragraph 4A. So things that we're running into issues with, are they personal property? Are they real property? I don't know. Ring doorbells. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many contracts we had just people battling it out over a Ring doorbell. So flat screen TV brackets on the wall that go with their TV, because the TV's theirs. Why wouldn't the bracket go with them? So why are brackets considered real property?
They're attached.
They're attached, they're mounted. Will they cause damage to remove them?
Yeah.
Yes, so, but people want them because it goes with the TV. So surround sound equipment, flat screen brackets, Ring doorbells, Nest thermostats, any of the new, cameras, things like that, that might be considered personal property, and you want them to stay, just put it in the contract and then it becomes real property. Again, flip that around. If you're walking through and you go, gosh, I really hope they take this, put it in the contract, make it happen. Okay, take a look at paragraph 5.
Wait,
Here.
I'm sorry, is exclusions, is that where, as the listing agent, that's where you want to make sure that you put the mineral rights if they're wanting to reserve the mineral
You could
rights?
put them there, but you could also put it in paragraph 13, just so it's not overlooked or missed, which is blank. If you look at paragraph 13, it's blank. All right, so on paragraph 5, to me, this is the most important paragraph almost in the entire contract, because 2 things happen. If you read the very first line, time periods for your investigations, inspections, and review happen. So that's your inspection period. The second thing that's going to happen is it's going to start the timer on your finance supplement, which we're going to look at the end. So 2 very important things happen with 1 date right here. Now, if you write a date in here, then your timer is going to begin 1 day after that date. So today's December 16th. If it said December the 16th, December 17th, day 1. Okay, and then your count starts from there. But if you're going back and forth and you're not sure when it's going to be agreed to, then leave it blank. If you leave it blank, it will be the 3rd day after signatures. So if we got everything signed today, 16 to 17, 17 to 18, 18 to 19, now your inspection period starts. So it gives you a little bit of a cushion, and then you don't have to worry about, you're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, did I change the inspection time? I don't know. So either way, some people don't like to leave blanks on contracts. It's completely up to you. Just be mindful
What
of
do
it.
you recommend putting there?
I leave mine blank. Yep. So then I always know honestly, I have 13 days to do inspections. So, but some people like to put dates in there or time, they'll say 1 day after all signatures. They write paragraphs. It's fine. All right. Any questions?
Pause, sorry,
No, you're fine.
interjection. When you're on the listing side and you're reviewing the contract with your seller, that's a really important thing to explain. Because if they just see, oh, they have a 10-day inspection period or a 14-day inspection period, and they don't understand that it's 3 days from the last day that the last party signed, then that 10 days is actually 13, or you know what I mean? So I like to, on the listing side, be like, this, put the date in there, counter the date depending on, like, we have Christmas and New Year's and all
Sure.
that coming up. So it's like, if you look at a calendar, you really need to understand what those days are, and you might want to actually put a date on time reference so that you can time it, and they understand that by this day, they have to have their response to you. I run into that myself anyway.
So if you counter it, you have to write a counter offer.
Well, it would be, yeah, for your time reference date, there's your countering the term in the contract. If you want an actual date instead of the.
So you're bringing clarity to the buyer's agent to make sure they're aware of what their inspection periods are?
Well, I'm just saying, if you're like on the listing side and you're reviewing the contract with the seller.
Mhm.
And you're saying, okay, here's the terms of the contract, that's actually a term of the contract,
Sure.
time reference date.
Mhm.
And a lot of, for me, for a long time, that was overlooked as a term in reference to, like, you can actually counter that, like, you can actually say, I want the time reference date to be this date for
Mhm.
things to start, and you can counter the length of the inspection period.
Mhm.
And I would always think about countering the length of the inspection period, but sometimes you can just counter the time reference date.
You can do that. The only thing I would probably not agree with you on is if that's the only thing that needed to be countered.
Sure.
Yeah, because countering kills the deal. So, and I would just make the seller aware, here's when it starts, here's where it ends. Are you okay with that? If they're not, then counter it, obviously.
Right.
Okay, so any other questions? Paragraph 6. So paragraph 6, just in summary, says that whatever property disclosure or disclaimer or exemption that was provided to you, that you have shown the potential buyer. The only thing I want to point out in this paragraph is the section that I underlined in red. A real estate licensee has no duty to seller or buyer to conduct an independent inspection. They assume that because you have a real estate license, you also have X-ray vision. So, and you need to remind them that you do not. If you can't see it, I can't see it. So we're gonna get inspections to make sure that you're super happy with this property. So now as we go down into the inspection period, which is paragraph 7, the buyer is going to have 10 days to do inspections if you leave this blank. Now, in this paragraph right here, I would recommend doing 10 to 12 days because you need to be mindful of the fact that the sellers are gonna have their house off the market while you're doing these inspections. And our contracts are super buyer friendly. If a buyer was to find something that they didn't want to purchase the home over, they could essentially cancel this. So if I see inspection days are like 20 days long, 20 days off market, that's not super fair to a seller, so be considerate of that, because especially in a multiple offer situation, if you put a really long inspection period on here, it might be why your contract's not getting accepted. Okay, when you do those inspections, let's say you're writing those 10 or 12 days in, before you do the inspections, you need to call the listing agent and just verify that all the utilities are on, especially if the property is vacant. It's not uncommon for sellers to turn things off and not tell the real estate agent, oh, well, I didn't think you needed the gas because we're not living there. Electricity and water's on, okay? They need everything on during that time so that they can do their inspections. Now, coming down here to paragraph 7B, who can do the inspections? Buyer, together with all persons that they deem qualified. This could be a licensed home inspector, but this could be their dad, it could be their brother, it could be their uncle, it could be the buyer themselves. So if the buyer is going to do their own inspections, you gotta make sure that you're there with them, first of all, and that they are not doing anything that would require them to have a license. They're not pulling the electrical panel off and looking in there. That would require them to have a license as an electrician. So you're not walking on the roof, we're not crawling into the house, we're not doing any of those kind of crazy things. It's a visual, non-invasive inspection. So, looking, checking outlets, things like that. Okay, everything down at the bottom, and this is going to continue on to the next page, are things that they can inspect for during this period of time. So everything from the, disclosures. One thing that I want to point out is Megan's Law. Megan's Law is the sex offender registry list. you're not to be looking for sex offenders for them. That needs to be their job. So you can Google Oklahoma Sex Offender Registry list and it'll pull up 2 pages on Google. Let them do it on their own, because if you tell them there are no sex offenders living in the neighborhood and they move in and find out that one lives next door, that's a lot of liability for you. Next thing I want to point out is, especially if you live in Norman, have the roof checked. So while you're doing your inspection, have somebody taking a look at the roof. If you have a 10-day inspection, don't wait until the 9th day to do your inspection and then find out the home inspector says, you know, that roof is kind of questionable. Because unless you've got a roofer that's gonna drop and run for you, this could be a problem. All right, and then carrying on to the next page at the top, again, you're gonna write the property address. The only other thing I wanna point out on the inspections at the top is number 12, square footage. So buyer shall not rely on any quoted square footage and shall have the right to measure the property. Just because the MLS says that's the square footage, it might not be. So most of the time they get their information from tax records, and I will tell you, they're notoriously wrong every time. So if you walk in a house and you're like, wow, this feels like really small for 1,700 square feet, they might want to have it measured, okay? Especially if that's a big deal to them. Because if the house appraises, then they're buying a house that was smaller than what they thought. All right, any questions on that one? Okay, let's go to paragraph C on here, treatments, repairs, and replacements. So on C1, treatments of termites and other wood destroying insects, treatment and repair in relation to termites and other wood destroying insects is going to be limited to the residential structure. Garages and other structures are designated in paragraph 13. So what this is saying is, if now in this paragraph, as we read this paragraph, I want you to take a look at that again. Does it say that sellers are required to treat for termites?
No.
It does not. So you're going to need to go to paragraph 13, which is the blank paragraph. If you want to guarantee that the seller will treat and you don't have to battle it out with them later, then put seller to treat for termites. And I think I have it in there as your example. So they're going to treat for termites. Now, if I do not in paragraph 13 designate any other buildings. So for instance, I just sold a house that had a house with a detached apartment on it. Garage, it's kind of a garage they kind of used as a studio, wood fence. If they found termites in the house and they said seller to treat for termites, they only have to do the house. If they find termites in that detached garage, do they have to treat for them?
No.
They do not, because you didn't write it in paragraph 13. So if there are other structures on the premises, make sure that you're including them all if it's important to you. Okay, so now residential structure, we talked about that. Now you've done all the inspections that you want to do, and you get to the end of your inspection period, whatever date that is, 10th day, 12th day. You now have 24 hours after the expiration of your time period to get all applicable inspection reports over to the seller. So that whole paragraph. Now here's where I love to hear agents go, but my buyer paid for that inspection and they're not turning them over. Yes, they are, because when they signed this contract, they contractually obligated themselves to make that happen, okay? So get them over there, you got 24 hours. You also have 24 hours to decide what is your buyer going to do. Did you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
I'll wait till you. Your sentence doesn't say that the sellers will repair. the
Not yet.
house. Huh?
Doesn't say.
It doesn't
which
say
one.
it's they're gonna do a whole barrier, full barrier system, but not repair.
No, if you want them to repair, if you feel like anything needs to be repaired, that needs to be added. So they can treat for them. Sometimes you don't know about termite damage until you start pulling the sheetrock down.
Sure.
Yeah, so you gotta, I mean, if you're like leaning in and you fall through the wall, yeah, you don't have to fix that. So, you know, it just kind of depends. All right, so let's go to reports being turned over. Your inspection period ends within 24 hours. Let's say today is the 16th and today's the last day of my inspections. Tomorrow, by the close of business, I need to get my TRR over to them if I choose to go that direction. And I have to turn over all my inspection reports. So at this point, your buyer has to make a decision. So if they did their inspections and then something caused them not to want to buy this house, then if in the sole opinion of the buyer, results of the investigations, inspections, review are unsatisfactory. So the buyer may cancel the contract by delivering a written notice of cancellation. That's not enough to pick up the phone and go, oh yeah, they found out that the HVAC needs to be replaced and we're canceling the contract. If you don't send over that cancellation within how long? 24 hours, are they buying a house? Yeah, they are. They're gonna be super mad at you, okay? So make sure that you are canceling that contract. That form is going to look like this, and it should be in your packet. So, and it says at the top, so it is a notice of cancellation, and you would check mark box number 1, that the inspections that were unsatisfactory, and that's the reason that they're canceling. Now, this form can be used for a lot of things. If the house doesn't appraise, or if the buyers are denied a loan, there's a lot of different reasons on here to use this form. But if they're canceling due to inspections, this is it. Anybody, any questions?
The seller does not sign this form.
Correct. Now, you'll notice down at the bottom, when the buyer says, hey, I'm not gonna buy this house because of inspections, buyers are the only ones that sign. The sellers do not have to agree to why you're canceling, they just have to know why you did. So you're gonna check mark it that the inspections were unsatisfactory.
I'm just out of curiosity, have you ever seen a seller like really able to hold the buyer to purchasing the property and then not just lose their earnest money? Have you seen it go through whatever court proceedings need to happen?
So what do you mean, because they
Specific
didn't
performance.
deliver?
Yeah, so they didn't turn in their TRR and they're like, yeah, there's a lot to be done there. We didn't want to buy it. And then the other party says, nope, the inspections are
Yes,
passed,
I have.
and they've held them to it and made them, okay, it's
Yep.
happened. I just.
There are sellers who sit on that contract, just, I mean, they like, and they hold their breath until the last day of contract, and then as soon as 24 hours pass, they're like, they didn't send anything over. And then when you do, and you ask for all that stuff, they're like, nope, contract says I don't have to do that.
But what it takes to get them to make the purchase, you have to go through the whole.
Yeah. So sometimes, some people will cut their nose off to spite their face. So instead of doing the repairs, they're like, you're buying a house. And then if you don't, I'm gonna keep all your earnest money and I may take you to court for specific performance. So some people just love to
Get into legal issues.
litigate. So they love to litigate.
Yeah, okay, I was just curious.
Okay, so you're either going to cancel the contract, if you want to move forward with the contract, then you're gonna choose option B. So if you choose option B, then you're going to fill out a treatment, repairs, and replacement form, asking for any repairs that are important to you. Now, the only thing I wanna say about what you're putting on your TRR, there are a couple of times where your transaction can fall through. We don't show a lot of houses just to go, whoo, bam, it blows up in my face, but this can be one of them. If you put a lot of things, when I open a TRR and it's like size 4 font and 75 things on it, your sellers will have the same reaction that you do when they go, whoa, that's a lot of stuff. Well, I didn't read it all. It could be all a bunch of minor stuff, but that's a lot of stuff. So when you're working with the buyers, try and keep it to the major components that will hold your deals together. You know, your roof, your HVAC, your hot water tank. Don't bust a contract over a $4 tube of pulping. So that's ridiculous. But anyway, so that's some soapbox on. So when you have something, you cannot put it on if it is decorative, okay? So decorative means that, you know, I don't like the color of this wall. Well, okay, well, when you own it, you can paint it whatever color you want. But if there's a hole in it, now we can fix those things. So keep in mind, this is not a wish list. It is intended for items that are broken or would have a materially adverse effect on the house, okay? I had someone send me over a TRR asking for a doorbell. My house didn't have a doorbell. So it's not a wish list. If you wanted a doorbell, you should put it on the original contract. Okay, this paragraph with the little splat symbol next to it. So once you send over your TRR, buyers and sellers have 7 days to go back and forth and negotiate that out. Maybe you sent over 10 items and they don't want to do 10, they only want to do 7. So they send it back to you. Well, I want 8. So you may go back and forth. So at the end of that 7 days, if you can't get worked out what repairs, the buyer says, I'm not buying it unless these are done, and the seller says, I'm not fixing it, then what does the last sentence say? contract will terminate and the earnest money will be returned to the buyer. It will be as if this contract never happened.
Right.
So keep in mind, keep your count on this. Once you send over the TRR, that starts your 7-day count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and be mindful of that. Okay, now, once you're out of your inspection period, this is really going to be a brass tacks period of time for your buyer, because their ability to cancel this contract for any reason is just expired. So if we get to the point at the end of our inspections and they have not canceled the contract, then they need to make sure that they understand, you do not get to cancel the contract just because you didn't perform inspections. Oh, I forgot, sorry. So you also do not get to cancel the contract because you couldn't get insurance on the property. You can get insurance. You're just probably not gonna like the price that you're gonna pay for it, okay? But you can get insurance. And then the third, if that appraisal comes back and that square footage is different than what was quoted to you in the beginning, can't cancel the contract for that reason if the house meets value. So sorry, you should have measured it during your inspection period if that was important.
So back to your insurance thing.
Mhm.
And it hasn't happened to me in a while, but I've had them try to back out of the contract or cancel the contract because their insurance company said, we're not covering that roof.
If they need to have done their inspection during that period of time. So now, here is kind of like a little bit of a loophole. If they have to go with the next insurance provider and the premium is a lot more, they may not qualify for the loan anymore.
Right.
So there's a loophole.
Right.
But if they can
But
get the
their
higher
insurance
premium.
company saying, we're not
They choose a different
offering
insurance
full
company.
coverage on that roof, that's not a legit excuse.
That's why it says check the, inspect the roof during your inspection period.
So
People
there's-
like to use that all the time, but if a seller's savvy on what this contract says, they're not gonna let you out of that.
So if their insurance, their specific insurance company doesn't want to cover it, they then have to find another.
A different
company.
carrier. Mhm. I want to use Allstate, but Allstate won't cover the roof now, so I'm going with State Farm, so, or something like that. Okay, yes,
I don't really remember like there being some language about in the buyers, the sole opinion of the buyers, like after the inspections, they can cancel the contract. Like you said, they have to, if they didn't do,
C2A,
what is it?
C2A, in the sole opinion of the buyer, the
Right.
results of their inspections are unsatisfactory, they can cancel the contract.
So what, then you said they can't cancel it if they didn't do any inspections, but if they walked through it, like.
No, I'm saying if you get to the end, let's say your inspections, like your end inspection date was today,
Yeah,
and then you wake up on December the 17th, go, oh, I should have done inspections. Sorry, it's too late. You missed your window. You're buying a house.
But as long as you're within your window, they don't even have to have
They can
inspections.
cancel it.
Correct,
Yeah, okay,
yes.
yeah,
They do not have to have a home inspector
Right.
come do their
They can
inspections.
say they don't want it without doing inspections within their time period, but the day after, I understand.
Yep. My inspections could entail the fact that I sat in front of that house and I don't like traffic pattern.
Right.
Okay,
Big yellow
so
truck.
that, I remember, because who can do inspections? The buyer or anyone they deem?
Yeah,
All right.
okay.
So if you send over a TRR,
Uh-huh.
anybody have 7 more days?
They have 7 days to decide if they want to do all of the items that are on it. Some sellers will sign it right away, and
You
then
can't
some
do any
won't.
more inspections in those 7 days.
Yeah, once you send over the TR, you need to make sure you're done with everything that you want to do, because you can't go, oh, I forgot, take it back. So you better hope that the listing agent's super nice if you do that, So, because they don't have to let you.
No, and I think your point, you're adding 7 days of
Yeah, that's what I'm
negotiation.
thinking, like, you show somebody a house and they're like, well, I really wanna think about it, then, I mean, essentially, you're like, find something to fix, and we'll send over TRR, and then we'll just go back and forth.
Well, what if your seller says, okay,
Yeah.
you're like, yeah.
Finish up.
Yeah, then you're stuck. So if the seller says, sure, I'll fix that, so
So
no
the-
problem.
And again, I haven't seen them in a while, but the TRRs that say have roof evaluated.
That's an inspection.
you
Don't
can't put
send,
that on the TRR.
don't put things on a TRR, because that should be an inspection for the buyer. Because if the buyer wants to know about it, the buyer needs to schedule it and pay for it and get it done. So I see people write on their seller to have the house evaluated by a structural engineer. Why would I as a seller want to do that? So you can cancel the contract and I'm stuck with a bill? No. No, you need to exhaust all of your inspections if they want it done. Okay, let's go to inspections, replacements, and walkthrough. It is super important that you do a final walkthrough on the property before they purchase, because when they sign those documents, that becomes their house and all the flaws that are with it. So when you go to do this walkthrough, keep in mind that the buyers are going to pay for those re-inspections if they want to have the property re-inspected. But also keep in mind that the seller can be there because the seller still owns the property. So if they want to be there while you're looking around at things, they absolutely can. All inspections, as I mentioned before, will be paid for by the buyer. It's a good idea to take the TRR form with you if they've agreed to those things. If you cannot visually see whether something's been fixed, so like chimney caps, I'm not climbing up there to make sure that's been done. You can, on your TRR, ask for receipts. So hot water tank to be, whatever needs to be done. You need to add a leg or put a pan underneath it or something. Receipts to be provided. So then, and keep it, I want to back up to TRRs too. Make sure that if it is a repair that needs to be done by somebody who is licensed, that you put on there that this repair is to be done by this licensed professional. So because can you put Freon in your own air conditioner? Sure. Yep. Will sellers do that? Yep. So they'll fix their own everything. So if you want it to be done by a licensed professional, make sure you request that and for the receipts. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry for this, but so I had a seller one time and he really wanted to drag his feet because he wasn't happy about the TRR. And I was like, well, we can just reply that you're not gonna repair anything. And he was like, well, if I don't reply at all, does the contract just cancel?
Yes.
And I said that, I was like, technically, if you don't reply, if the seller chooses not to reply at all, the contract will cancel and the money will be returned to the buyer.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's no answer is an answer. So you have to have their acceptance of the repairs at the bottom.
Because I think what he was trying to do is he wanted to go back on market without saying, I'm not gonna do anything, and then the buyer agreed, and then we close with that buyer. Like, I think he was like.
Taking it too?
Yeah, I think he was like, you know what, I'll just go back on market and get a better offer, and he didn't wanna reply at all, because he didn't wanna close with that buyer, and he was that mad. But he was like, even if I say no repairs.
Yeah. It'll void your contract.
It'll void it, okay.
So no response at all. It's actually-
No
actually
response is
smart
a
move.
response.
Actually cancels the contract, and that way you don't keep going with that person.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, 7 days, so, yeah. Yeah, so sometimes you have to have that conversation with your buyer, you know, don't ask for silly things, because
Right,
this
they
could,
could just
you're
not
gonna give the
reply,
seller a reason to
And,
have this
yeah,
contract.
and a no reply essentially cancels your contract, like.
Right, so you'll have people that
That was a
put
wake-up call
like,
for me, because I was like, oh, because we just think that they wanna sell.
right,
And
right.
not every seller cares, like, they're content to
They're like, I'm
go
not,
back up.
I'm not doing 75 repairs, they either buy
Right.
the house or they don't buy the house.
Well, and the attitude, and you know how things can go down, and it just went down, the way inspections were done were not well, and he was mad, and he was like, I don't wanna work with them anymore, I'm like, I'm not gonna apply at all.
Yeah, TRRs definitely give them a loophole.
Okay,
Yep.
cool, thanks.
So you can put no repairs. Okay, let's move down to risk of loss. In a nutshell, seller's insurance is gonna cover the property until it closes, and then the buyer's insurance will pick up from that, the moment that the title transfers. And then acceptance of the property, it is super important, let's go back to that walkthrough again, it's super important that the buyer goes through and make sure that house is exactly as it was when it was contracted, and that they are super happy with it, because there are no warranties expressed or implied that will survive the closing. So if the seller says, oh, I didn't fix the hot water tank, I'll send my plumber over after closing, do they have to do that?
No.
No, you may be sitting there waiting on that plumber to show up, and he never does, there's nothing you can do about it. So if you ever get to a walkthrough and you have your inspection list and there are things on it that are not done, I always ask my buyer, I said, okay, here's where we gotta make a decision. You can either live with this repair not being done, or you cannot live with this repair without it being done. And if that's the case, we need to call the title company and push the closing, because we're not coming. Okay, don't sign off on a house that they're not
I've
having.
always asked for my repairs to be done with the receipts from the licensed professionals and turned in with pictures 72 hours prior to closing.
No, it's a
because
great idea.
I've showed up and then just
Not been done.
nothing been done, and they said it was done, and
Yeah, that's not a bad
or the
idea.
house is full of their trash and
Trash.
stuff.
Yeah, Yeah, if you want it to be what they call broomstick clean, sometimes you have to write that in, so, okay, property address, we're on page 4, property address is gonna be at the top, we're talking about title insurance or title evidence. Now, this is gonna be a seller's expense, what does the seller have to pay for? They're going to be bringing the abstract up to date, and they're going to be providing you with a UCC certificate. Now, your buyer is going to have to make a decision if they're getting a loan, whether they want to have this type of coverage, when it was underneath buyer's expense. So do they want title insurance, or do they just want an attorney's opinion? So either way, when a property changes hands in Oklahoma, an attorney is going to review the abstract every single time. The only thing that's different, what title insurance covers things that happened in the past. So sometimes when I'm looking at a document, I'm like, seller signature, transferred to this person, everything looks good. They only look at recorded documents at the courthouse. If it was recorded and made part of the abstract, they're reviewing that. Will an attorney 10, 15 years later know that the person who signed that could have forged it? Probably not. So that comes out in the wash later. So if you do not have title insurance, sorry, it's up to you to make sure that you defend your title. So if you do have title insurance, you can call your title insurance policy and they will defend the title for you. Either way, an attorney's looking at it, the only way you can protect yourself is by getting title insurance. If you're getting a loan, lender will require title insurance. There is no way they're going to give somebody claimed title when they're using that property as collateral. So it will only save you $50 not to get title insurance. Big whopping savings. All right, so make a choice, title insurance or just an attorney's opinion. And then you're going to go down to lander boundary survey. So if you're going to have a loan on this, at a minimum, the lender is likely going to require you to have a mortgage inspection report, which means a licensed surveyor is going to go out and look at the property and give them a rendering. Where's the house sit? Where are the easements? Are there any, structures other than the house on the property? If your buyer wants a pen stake survey where they go out and put the pens and the flags and give them a full report with surveying equipment, that's expensive. You're talking about $1,700 to probably $3,000 to have a pen stake survey done. So they need to understand that that's their cost, unless you're asking the seller to pay for that, of course. Any questions on the mortgage inspection?
Have you ever seen vacant land just get a mortgage inspection?
And
Yep.
there's no correlation between the word mortgage inspection report, other than it's required when you have a loan to have a mortgage inspection.
What a
You
mortgage
can get
is-
one without a loan, right? If you're buying,
Yeah,
you're paying cash.
if you're paying cash, you don't have to have either one of these. So
Okay.
the only reason that a lender wants to see this is lenders don't lay eyes on this property. So this
Right.
is essentially the eyes for them
Right.
of what they're loaning on. What am I loaning money on? Oh, it's a house. They verified it was there in the right spot.
And do they actually do any measuring, like if the mortgage inspection, the survey, do they walk up the property and like measure from the fence across at 75 feet and it's supposed to be that much?
Most of the time they do not.
No?
They take
Okay.
the old survey, they bring it and they say, okay, last time this was brought up to date, there was a house
Okay,
and now there's a house and a pool. So the new surveyor will measure where the pool is and that's it. If you do not put up fences or build near your property line unless you do a pin stake survey, because that's more accurate.
okay.
So on a cash transaction and the buyer doesn't want either one, you just leave a blank.
Leave them blank. So, okay, title evidence. So this is important because the title evidence, which is the title commitment, is going to be sent directly to you as their real estate representative. So your job is to make sure you review it. Everybody knows exactly what they're looking at, right? Yes. If you're not, you're gonna be in my next post licensing class. So you're reviewing, you're looking for liens. If you see IRS on there anywhere, you should start having palpitations, but you're just checking the title, making sure everybody's names are right on here. Title evidence is important. Your buyer gets to review this 10 days prior to closing. So don't sit on that. When the title company sends it to you, you review it and send it on to them so that they can review it 10 days prior to closing.
Don't they look at it too and say, hey, I don't see anything to be concerned about, or we're trying to figure out these other
Title
things?
companies,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes.
They should.
In the metro area, they will call you when there's problems. Outside of the metro area, they're like, you didn't see that? So make sure you know what you're looking for.
Okay.
So, yeah, for sure. Okay, title commitment, like I said, send it on to them. Now let's go down here into if there is a problem on the title, if a cloud comes up, this contract is going to automatically extend 30 days. So if I thought I was closing on December the 31st and they have a cloud on the title, this could essentially extend my contract into January and nobody has to sign for that extension. It just automatically happens. If you do not want the contract to extend, then you need to write 0 in here. Sometimes people don't want to extend due to a 1031 tax exchange time limit. Sometimes it's due to rate locks. Just keep in mind, if you don't want it to extend, put 0 there. Let's go down to taxes, assessments, and prorations. So your taxes are going to be assessed on the current calendar year, and they're going to be prorated through the date of closing. Now, why can this be important? I have one closing right now that the taxes say 0 on it. Why would the taxes on this property say 0?
Sellers exempt.
Okay, why would the seller be exempt?
Veteran.
Bedroom.
Okay. Like a disabled veteran, they're gonna have 0 taxes. Is your buyer that's coming into ownership going to have 0 taxes?
No.
No, so if they're like, woo, there's no taxes on this, yeah, that's not you, okay? So make sure you tell them that, yeah, you're gonna have taxes, they didn't have taxes, but you will, okay? Keep in mind, they're gonna be based on the previous calendar year. You may need to call the title company if the taxes are 0 to find out what they would actually be on this purchase.
So in that scenario where the seller is exempt and the buyer is buying and say it's October, taxes are gonna be due, property will have switched hands, the county will charge the new buyer,
They'll give them an estimated tax amount.
and that's charged, and how do they, well, my question is, how are they gonna prorate that for the seller?
They don't pray, if the seller had 0 taxes, he would still have 0 taxes. The buyer closing in October or after, they're gonna say your estimated taxes on this property are X number of dollars. They'll collect that from them at closing, and they'll go ahead and pay the property taxes for them in advance.
So if I have a disabled veteran that's exempt and I have the listing, I need to make sure that the title company has that right on the settlement statement.
Yeah, right. They should know that, because when they pull taxes, it will say 0, but yeah, you do need to be checking that for sure.
It should.
Yeah, for sure. The only one thing I want to say about taxes, you need to be really careful if the property has not sold in a long time. So especially when we saw this 12% increase in property values over last year. Because remember, these taxes are assessed on the assessment ratio of what they thought the property was worth at that time. When you buy it for a whole lot more, they're gonna reassess it. And what's gonna happen to the taxes? They're gonna go up, so keep that in mind. Okay, now, seller, according to this document, needs to make sure that they pay all the utilities or anything else that could cause a lien on this property. That's paragraph 11B. And then on 11C, if you're purchasing a property that has a tenant in it, you need to make sure that the security deposits get transferred at closing. Don't bring them after closing. They need to bring either cashier's check or a check from a property management company to the closing. And you need to make sure that you get that before you walk out. So any leases, if you're closing in the middle of the month and the tenant has paid rent, and so your buyer will essentially get half a month's rent. Make sure that you're getting that collected at closing. All right, let's go to page 5. Property address again is at the top. Let's go to paragraph 12. We're going to talk about residential service agreements, which are also known as home warranties. So you have 3 boxes here. You have A, if you don't want a home warranty; B, one's being offered on the MLS and you want it to transfer; or C, your one is not being offered, but your buyer would like to have one. So if your buyer wants to have one, you need to make sure that you write in what is the cost of that home warranty. Some of them will, they can be as low as $400, they can go up to $800. The more you add on, the more expensive that home warranty is going to actually be. If you want the seller to pay any portion of that, you need to make sure that you're going to write it into the second line. So first line says how much does it cost, second line says this is what the seller is gonna agree to pay. They can pay half of it, all of it, 3/4 of it, whatever you want it to be. On 13, as I mentioned, and it's on your page, if there's wood destroying organisms found during inspections, seller to treat with a full barrier system. That keeps people from spot treating for termites, okay, drilling into just the garage instead of doing the whole house. So now paragraph 14 is important, never comes up unless you have a problem. Remember, you don't have a problem unless you have a problem. But it says that your buyer and seller will agree to mediate before they take each other to small claims court. If you go straight to small claims court with this contract in hand, the judge is going to look at you and say, did you have a chance to mediate? And he's going to send you out in the hall with Duty Hauser and you get to talk about it. Then you can come back in and hash it out. Paragraph 15 is a brand new paragraph.
Yeah, there's a document.
I know. I'm just thinking young. And half this room probably doesn't know who he is.
No clue.
They're like, who's that guy? All right, paragraph 15 is new.
Attorney.
No, he's an attorney. It just says that if you're going to litigate based on this contract, it has to be done in the state of Oklahoma, not outside. So that's a new paragraph. Somebody must have tried that. So 16, okay, now we get into breach and failure to close. What can happen if somebody doesn't fulfill their half of the contract? If it's if the breach is by the seller, so buyer has done everything that they're supposed to do and the seller has decided that they do not want to close. So then the seller under this contract, or if the seller hasn't done what they're supposed to, buyer can cancel this contract and receive their earnest money back. So that's one option. Second option, going to the end of this sentence, is that they can pursue any remedy available at law, including specific performance. So what is specific performance? Yeah, you said you were selling me a house. You're selling me a house, okay? So that's one avenue that they can have. You cannot, as I mentioned before, have your cake and eat it too. So you can't say, well, give me my earnest money back and I'm gonna cancel the contract and I'm gonna sue you for specific performance. You do one or you do the other, okay? If you want to be able to take them in court, you gotta leave your earnest money because that shows that you have good faith of moving forward with the contract. Now let's flip this over, and the buyer hasn't done what they're supposed to do. Seller has done everything. Seller has the same option. They can also cancel the contract and retain earnest money as liquidated damages. So now in this paragraph, they can only keep 5% of the purchase price. So if you have buyers that have made this giant down payment of earnest money, let's say $20,000 on a $100,000 house, seller can't keep all 20. Okay, they can keep 5% of it and that's it. The rest of it's going to go back to the buyer. So they can also seek specific performance or any remedy available at law. Now I did skip over this in paragraph 16. Does everybody see in black bold print where it says time is of the essence?
Yes.
Okay, time is of the essence in a contract means you're held to that date. So you don't drop off the earnest money by the third day, you're in breach of contract. If you don't perform, or if you say you're going to repair things on the TRR by the closing date and you don't, you're in breach of contract. So it's really just a hard deadline date of when you need to get things done before you give the other party the ability to litigate against you.
I have a question. So like, they said they showed up, right there, final inspection, and things weren't prepared. So that,
Sellers in
your
breach of
choice,
contract.
is it canceling the contract or you can sue them and get your repairs anyway?
You don't have to go through with the contract because the seller has breached the contract. Because our TRRs say that the repairs will be done prior to closing. And if you're at closing and they're still not done, seller has breached the agreement, therefore buyer does not have to go through with that. You gave the buyers a loophole to get out of your contract now. And there's not anything you can do about it, Mr. Seller, whose stuff's all in the moving van. You did it to yourself.
Can we renegotiate terms at that moment?
Sure, you can renegotiate right until.
You're gonna have to, really.
Yeah, you better be super skilled, yes,
Yeah.
but you can do that.
When I did closing for Leroy, when I did closing, the buyers, they did their final inspection like an hour before closing.
Mhm.
So of course, there was no repairs or anything, they were happy, but if they wouldn't have been happy, it was either
Pick up the
close
phone and
sue
call.
or don't
Yep, because you're calling the title company, we have a breach of contract, so we're not closing today. So that doesn't mean you can't push it out into the future with an addendum that extends the closing date to get the repairs done, but once the seller breaches the contract, the buyer doesn't have to follow through. They're done.
But really easy just to renegotiate terms at that point.
Yeah, depending on what it
$2,500,
is.
I'll take care of all these myself.
Yep, sure.
Or 10,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
We're not closed. I've been in a title company for 3 hours and not closed.
Yep.
And rewrote, take your computer with you every single time you go to closing. I've written addendums at the table.
Okay, let's go to incurred expenses. So this is gonna be a short one. Incurred expenses, you order it, you pay for it. So on release of earnest money, now, when we're talking about this release of earnest money, this is to assume that you have placed the earnest money in a brokerage account. If you take the earnest money to a title company, all gloves off, okay? And the reason why is because the title companies are not they are not overseen by the real estate commission, they're overseen by the insurance commission. So if you take it to believe it or not, with the thousands of transactions that title companies close a year, they do not have a process for giving you earnest money back. There's only two solutions. One, you get buyers and the sellers agree to who it goes to, or two, you're going to court. That's it. That's their choices. And then when you get the court order to have the earnest money released, then they'll release it. When you leave it at a brokerage, there are a couple of other additional options that you have. So one, ultimately, which is the best, get the buyers and sellers to agree to how it's going to be dispersed. If that doesn't happen, move to step two, go to mediation. If you still can't get it worked out, now you can go to interpleader court. But they do give us a fourth option under this, which means a lot of times when transactions fall apart, it's very emotional. Buyers assume they lost their earnest money, sellers assume that it got it back and it's just sitting there. So what do you do with it? You go to Vegas. Just kidding. You do not go to Vegas. So you have, as a broker, I can send out certified letters to both parties and say, hey, if I don't hear from one of you guys, I'm going to release the earnest money. And I'm like, this guy. And I can choose which person is going to get the earnest money back. And then I wait 15 days. If I don't hear anything from somebody within 15 days and I release the earnest money, it's off our books. Okay. If I do have someone that calls and says, hey, I don't want you to release the earnest money to that person because I feel like I am, due the money. Then I take it and it goes to small claims court and we let the judge decide. Okay, so there is a process, but only if you have it at a brokerage account. Okay, paragraph 18 just gives you permission to accept all offers, counter offers, and inspection reports on their behalf. And then on the last page, property address is going to be at the top. Paragraph 19 deals with non-foreign sellers, and title companies typically will take care of this for us. It only applies to properties that are over 300,000, and it's a tax that they pay that attaches to the property. So if you're concerned about that, contact your title company and they'll address it for you. Now on paragraph 20, right here where this arrow is pointing, this is where you're going to write a termination date for this contract. So you need to make sure that you have a termination contract or termination date. It can be as long or as short as you want it to be. It could be today by noon. It could be tomorrow by 5. It could be 48 hours. I don't care what you put, just put something. If you leave it blank, could this seller accept this contract 6 months from now?
Yes.
Sure. So make sure that you're at least giving your buyers a stop time, stop loss. So, now, on the area where it says offer rejected and the seller is not making a counter offer, now they put this on here to prove that the sellers have reviewed this. Keep in mind, we cannot force sellers to sign this. And when you're in a multiple offer situation getting 20 different contracts, they're probably not going to sign every single one of these. So our MLS rules and regulations, if you're worried about whether is my offer going to be presented or not, you always have the right to be present. So yeah, it doesn't make any friends, I will tell you that up front, but you say, I want to be present when my offer is submitted. You can be there while they explain, you can't talk. I have not done that.
I'm gonna do it.
But Aaron, I feel like you've got to go in with duct tape, because you can't be like, well, what they really meant on paragraph 1, you can't talk at all. And then once the offer has been presented, you got to get them linked.
I'm gonna do it.
All right, sellers do not sign if there is a counter offer. Buyers always sign because this is their offer. So at this point, does anybody have any questions about pages 1 through 6? Okay, very quickly, we're gonna talk about contingencies. Contingencies, if your buyer needs to sell their house in order to purchase the next house, and they cannot buy if they don't sell it, you need to have one of these contingency forms. Now, there are two. Looking at the one that's on the left, their house is presently under contract. If their house is under contract, in the MLS, the property is going to be changed to pending. You need to make sure that you not only fill this property out, but what does the red underline say? A copy of their contract is attached. So how are you going to prove to me that their house is officially under contract? You're going to attach a copy of the contract. If you want to mark out all the buyers and sellers' names, you're like, I don't want them to know who it is. Toss it out. I'm sure it's somebody famous. Okay, so you can either on the date, you can either put the actual close date that their property is closing, or you can date it out a few days later than what their actual closing date is. And if their house does not close by that date, then this buyer would not be on the hook for purchasing the next house. It's their loophole. Now, if your buyer wants to go shopping because they want to see what's out there, they're not sure if they want to buy a house, then you're going to use this form. Their house is not under contract yet. So if their offer gets accepted, then you're going to choose one of these on paragraph 2. They're either going to get their house is either right now it's on the market, it's just not under contract, or 2, they're going to get it on the market within 2 days. Now, this is printed in black ink, and I don't know if my sellers can get their house on the market in 2 days. It may be 4. Do they only have 2 days?
Once you change it.
Okay, can I mark that out and put 4 days?
Yeah.
Yes, so just because it's in ink does not mean things can't be changed. If you don't like what it says, draw a line through it and initial it. That means it doesn't apply.
So on the listing, sorry, it's,
We had accepted a contract, that they hadn't listed yet, but we got another offer. It was better, if they didn't list it and have it under contract, you can cancel within, how many, what's the time limit?
Okay, so when on here, now keep in mind, go to paragraph 3. If your house is not under contract, they're going to be continuously marketing their property. If they get an offer that is not contingent, like Aaron, you brought me an offer and they got to sell their house, okay? But
I
Jackie
want to win
brings,
it. Let's change it.
okay,
I want
so
to be the one.
Jackie has a client that needs to sell her house. So Jackie's client needs to sell her house and it's an okay offer. And then Aaron comes to me with a better
Cash.
offer, cash, and they don't have a house to sell. So what is gonna happen is his contract, we have to fully negotiate that with one little clause on paragraph 13, that the original offer has to be released before we are under contract. So now I'm gonna go back to Jackie. Sorry, Jackie, we got another offer that the seller really wants to take. Can your buyers purchase without?
No, they can't. No, they can't.
Then
They-
you got a lot of battle it out.
Peggy, is there a window of time for them to make that
They
decision?
have at a minimum 24 hours.
It's right here.
So, yeah, if you put 48 hours on here, they can, but according to our paragraph, read it upside down now, they only have 24 hours, the minimum you have to give, it's on paragraph 4, last sentence,
No less.
no less than 24 hours after delivery of notice. So you have to give them a minimum of 24 hours, but if you put that in your contract, that there's a 48-hour kickout clause, then you do have to give them the whole 48 hours, okay? So those are your loop, make sure you're protecting your buyer if they have property to sell. Now, last page that we're gonna talk about is I mentioned that all the time reference dates started 2 things. It started your inspections, but it also started your finance. We're not going through every finance page, but I do want to show you on this because they all have the exact same verbiage. You have 5 days from the time reference date to do the following. Get in and pay for those initial fees, those initial loan fees, including the property appraisal and credit report. So if you are the seller and you're like, oh, because sometimes we have buyers that don't go in and pay for the appraisal for days and days and days. So, and it's gonna delay your closing. Your seller at day 5, if they go, okay, did they pay for the appraisal yet? And lender's like, nope, can the seller cancel his contract?
Yep.
Sure. So because you didn't hold up your site, you're in breach of the contract that you signed. So now, it doesn't mean that the appraiser has picked up the order. It only means that it's been paid for, okay? So keep that in mind. Every single one of our finance pages have this, conventional, FHA, VA, USDA, Native American, doesn't matter. All right, that is it. So fast and furious, any questions?
Has anybody had an offer received with a contingency in the last year and a half?
I had,
You had.
well, I've had offers
Accepted.
made, that wasn't what they accepted.
Well, I'm saying, did anyone win and actually close on the contract with a contingency? And
I'm getting ready to make an offer with contingency on it.
They're coming back, we're seeing them a little bit more. Okay, sign-in sheet, where is that guy? Okay, and everybody who was here has their license number next to this so that I can give you credit? All right, perfect, we are done for the day, thank you for coming.
Good job, baby.